Club Drive is a collect-a-thon driving game, and I am baffled that this even got released. An orb spawns in a random place on the map, and you have to get it, and then another orb spawns in a different place, and you have to get that. You do this 10 times, then you'll get a game over screen and get sent back to the title screen. There's only 5 levels, and one of them is even hidden behind a code. Not only is there no enemies to kill you in any of them, but the map also tells you exactly where the collectibles are. What's the point? Beating the computer's score? Well, good luck failing, because it took the fastest computer 30 freaking minutes! You can also switch the game to race mode, which is not the default mode for some godforsaken reason, but it's just as bafflingly thoughtless. Once again, there's no opponents, so you're just up against the ridiculously pathetic time, and they don't even do laps right. What they think a lap is driving to one side of the track, and then the next lap is driving back. On the bright side, I really like its flat shaded polygon look, and the music, albeit terrible, goes very well with its cursed aesthetic. Shrek's Carnival Craze Party Games is a minigame collection with nothing more to it. There's 6 different areas, each with 5 games that you play with 3 computers. You don't even have to win any of them, just fill the point quota before time runs out, which destroys the point of having computers, but at least this way their terribly impersonated voices will repeat the same lines throughout each and every game 4 times as constant. Because honestly, that's the best part of it. The sheer terribleness of everything is very amusing, and it never got old for me throughout the hour it took for me to beat it. Cubics Robots for Everyone is a top-down racing game that's impossible to lose. I had no idea it was based on a show until I started it up, because it just plays clips from what appears to be a random episode between races. The clips keep mentioning things that are happening, but they're not. I'm just racing. I beat a few tracks and they were way too easy, so before realizing that I already beat half of the game, I went back and started a new one on the hardest difficulty, and I can't notice any difference! I won every track on my first try, which means you can easily experience everything this game has to offer in 25 minutes! It's even shorter if you skip the cutscenes. Arcade Zone is a lazy collection of minigames where you have to beat very annoying characters' high scores. They talk the entire time you play, and they have very few lines that repeat again and again and again. Do this for an hour and you're rewarded with a 10-second ending. You can keep playing to unlock all the pretty pictures in the prize section, but why would you want to do that? Also, why are the names of the games on the box art? They're not real games. When Disney Pixar's Monsters, Inc. released in theaters, almost every active console got its own exclusive game to tie into it. The Sony PlayStation got Disney Pixar Monsters, Inc. Scream Team. The PlayStation 2 got Disney Pixar Monsters, Inc. The Game Boy Color got Disney Pixar Monsters, Inc. The Game Boy Advance got Disney Pixar Monsters, Inc. And the GameCube got Disney Pixar Monsters, Inc. Scream Arena, which is typically viewed as the worst of the bunch. And it's also the one I beat. Screw you, Xbox. While the other consoles all got some variation of a platformer, the GameCube is the only one to get a dodgeball game. Ooh. The game starts you off with what looks to be training missions, but when you do those, the rest of the game is just doing the same thing in different arenas again and again and again and again and again and again. Precisely that many agains because there's only 7 stages. How much time do they have to make this? This is so cursed! Really, the only thing that positively stands out is the lighting, but when the game is this bad, why even mention it? Mario and Sonic at the Sochi 2014 Olympic Winter Games is a lazy collection of minigames plopped together for the sole reason of making sure that the series meets its quota of having 17 games a year. I've played a couple of the older ones, and even those don't seem as lazy and lifeless as this. All the characters' dialogue is sampled from previous games, and the models don't even move their mouths. Some of the minigames are fine, but that's really the best it gets, and it's really annoying that the single-player mode forces you to constantly change what controller you're using in between games. They could have easily figured out a way to make all these simple games controllable with a single controller, but as I said, they were lazy. Chuck E. Cheese sports games is like Wii Sports, but not good. Not only are the games even more simplified, but there's also a very weird way you earn medals. Unlike a normal game, you don't get them by doing good. You have to grind your way up this chart. And sure, doing good will make the process faster, but it will still take several hours to get the platinum medals. And double sure, some of the games change a little when you earn a gold medal, but it's no near enough to warrant playing the same basic minigames for that long. So I just stick with the multiplayer, but then again, there are way better offerings that'll give you the same experience on the Wii. Flower is a motion-controlled game where you fly around touching flowers and restore the color to all 5 of the dreary levels. There are no enemies to speak of, and the only obstacles are things that shock your character and make you lose control for a total of 2 seconds while an animation plays. And you can tell it's intense, because those only show up near the end of the game. Its beautiful graphics and soothing soundtrack clearly shows it's supposed to be more of an art piece than a game, so at that point, just make an animated short. SpongeBob SquarePants Revenge of the Flying Dutchman is the very first 3D platformer using the license. I was never a fan of the sequel, Battle for Bikini Bottom, but now I think I should try it again because this was so bland that I think I'll appreciate it more. For some reason, you have to 100% every level to unlock the last one, so half of the game is just aimlessly wandering around every level, wondering what the heck you're supposed to be doing. The game also uses a costume gimmick, which is fine on paper, but is very poorly implemented. The Mermaid Man one you only have to use once, and the Reef Blower one is also barely ever used, which would be acceptable if each costume didn't have their own song. That means that the song that plays whenever you use the remaining costume, the fishing gear, will play. And it will play for a great majority of the game due to it being the only useful costume, and it gets quite annoying! At the very least, it could have been a halfway decent song. The game's dialogue and cutscenes are pretty funny bad, but that's not enough for me to recommend it. Mr. Bones is a very weird platformer. Should I even call it that? The first half of the game is mostly 2D platforming with an occasional gimmick stage here and there, but by the time you put in the second disc, it goes completely bonkers. Some levels are fun, most others are frustrating, which even include the traditional platforming levels due to just how close to the edge the camera makes you. Honestly, most of the reason why I even like it is because of how fascinating it is. The game's atmosphere is among nothing I've seen in any other. It's very trippy, but charming. Dance Dance Revolution Mario Mix doesn't feel real. It's like a hilariously absurd ROM hack with its story mode that tries to think of ways of making dancing the only solution to your character's problems. This is the first Dance Dance game I've ever played. Are they all like this? The average complaint this game gets is that it's too easy, and those people clearly didn't beat it because you unlock a harder difficulty when you do. However, that in itself brings in a plethora of new problems. First up is the clear overcompensation for the game's pathetically short length. It's only an hour long, and the only reason it's as long as that is because the game doesn't let you skip the cutscenes. Which is fine at first because the dialogue is so bad that it's funny to read, but it doesn't even let you skip them on the New Game Plus you unlock. If the game tries to make up for its lack of content by making you beat it multiple times, then why the hell doesn't it let you skip the dialogue that it knows you already read? And your inability to do so gets even worse when you realize you have to start at the beginning when you run out of lives. And by the time you unlock very hard mode, you will be restarting the entire game again and again if you plan on beating it. Thanks, but no thanks. I enjoyed beating it on hard mode for the most part, but I'm not suffering through the endless mashing of the A button just to try again. GoldenEye 007 Reloaded is a first-person shooter based on the 6th newest James Bond movie at its time of release. So why make a direct adaptation of a 15-year-old movie that's quite literally no one's favorite James Bond movie? Well, because they wanted to trick people into thinking it was a remake of the Rareware game. Both games are unrecognizable from one another, but that's okay because that means this one's actually kind of fun. But it definitely has some bad gameplay decisions that bogs the experience down, like the easiest sin QuickTime events and that god-awful final boss. But nothing does that quite as much as the ridiculously long loading screens that happen every single time you die. Games aren't meant to be easy, and dying is a key to getting better, so you should probably try your damned hardest to optimize that. It turns a very smooth and fast-paced shooter into a slog, on harder difficulties anyway, but as I said, games aren't meant to be easy. New Super Lucky's Tale is a 3D platformer that's just good enough to be enjoyable, but it's right next to the border. It gets a lot right and a lot wrong, but what it gets right isn't too right, and same goes for the wrong. It is kind of sad this isn't even the first retail version of the game, though. It was just called Super Lucky's Tale before they wanted to completely confuse the Mario fans. Charging full price for the update makes its okayness a bit more pathetic, but you've most likely never played any version, so with the $15 it goes for on eBay as your first purchase of the game, then I'd say it's just worth it enough. Pen Try Isolon is a platformer racing game hybrid, and it's pretty fun for what it is. The only problem is that they got lazy and grinded its 30 minutes of content into a complete game. Not only do you have to replay all tracks multiple times with varying lengths, which is fine by itself, at least each replay has new things, but you also have to replay all alternate versions of each track to get the extra medal required to get the ending. That turns what should have just been 4 races into 24. So I would not recommend beating it in one sitting. If there's any game simplistic enough that even the 3DO could run it without frame rate issues, Bust a Move would be one of the safest bets in existence. It's a simple, fun puzzle game that even the Game Gear can run. But the 3DO amazes me yet again, because apparently its stilt image background and tiny ball sprites are still too much for the console to handle. I was never able to beat the Versus mode in any of the sequels, but amazingly enough, the excessive slowdown actually gives you more time to think about where to shoot the bubbles, and I was finally able to beat both modes in a Bust a Move game. But that doesn't excuse it. I know the 3DO's hardware is not made for 2D games, but Street Fighter 2 runs perfectly fine, so this was clearly a rush port. But it still might just be the best version, because as far as I know, this is the only one that doesn't give you limited continues. And due to there being 100 levels, it's the only version that's even worth attempting to beat. It even lets you save. Clockwork Knight is a 2D platformer on the Sega Saturn, and there's not really much to say about it gameplay-wise. It's fairly basic. The only notable thing I can think of is its use of continues. A common thing platformers of the era did was make both coins and continues useless. Coins are pointless because they only gave you a higher score, which is also pointless. And continues are pointless due to it just being more lives. But Clockwork Knight is a system where you can spend the coins you collect on more continues. So if you take the time to recollect the coins every single time you use a continue, you get unlimited tries, and I'd say that's a pretty fair trade. Anyway, the game's fine. Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus is a 3D platformer with some light stealth elements, and I do mean light. Every couple of days the game developers would randomly remember the gimmick and say, put a stealth thing here. And that's a fact. The game also has very inconsistent deaths. Sometimes you die in one hit and sometimes in two by the very same enemy. They even have different animations for getting hurt and killed, so are all the times I die in one hit just a glitch? It happens an awful lot, so I have no idea. Besides that, the game's pretty good, but not even close to Nintendo's platformers like its reputation suggests. Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy is a somewhat underwhelming but very well-structured platformer. I love how the entire game is just one giant level with different themed areas, and of course that means there's no loading, but I find it very odd that there's no health pickups. If I do badly in a battle and I'm low on health, I might as well just give up and die to save time, because I don't know when the next checkpoint is and I won't have anything to keep me going. But that won't be a problem in the final boss, because it's very anticlimactic and bland, and so is the soundtrack. I hope whoever made these lifeless jingles didn't get paid. Evolution: The World of the Sacred Device is one of the only RPGs I've ever played growing up, and it's also the first one I've ever beaten. I'm probably just biased from nostalgia, but I really enjoyed coming back to it. The gameplay, albeit repetitive, is a great casual time waster, and the soundtrack definitely helped to not get boring as fast. I guess it's about time to check out some other retro RPGs now that I've finally beaten one. Dead Rising 2, Off the Record, is more of a guilty pleasure than a well-designed experience, but I only put that into account with movies. Video games are strictly for having fun, and fun is what I had. I tried to beat the first Dead Rising, but its difficulty was far too unforgiving for how clunky the controls were. Dead Rising 2 not only has actual checkpoints so you don't have to run for 30 minutes every time you die, but it also lets you move while aiming. What a revolutionary idea! It still runs on a timer though, which I think kinda ruins the concept of the game. Also, I got the bad ending due to me not doing what was advertised as a side mission, having no warning that was important, but it's still silly, dumb, and yet satisfying fun to turn your brain off to. Just not too off or else the timer will screw you. God of War 2 is a hyper-violent hack-and-slash beat-em-up, and it's a lot of fun. When you're beating people up, that is. Like many hack-and-slashes, it also has puzzles spread across, and I'm already bad at video game puzzles, so whenever I can't figure one out, I look it up, and most of the time it's 100% my fault and I feel really stupid, but not here. Quite a few of these have ridiculous expectations of what they expect you to figure out. Still a good game, though. Dark Watch is an unexpected gem by Capcom. I've never heard of it before I randomly found it at a bull moose. It kind of reminds me of the newer Doom games with how no BS it all is. And its gothic fantasy setting gives it a great variety in its weapons and enemy types. It does seem a little rushed in some areas though, mainly its poorly implemented ideas. Since you're a vampire, the sun is bad, but in this case it only gets rid of your powers. Powers like having your health refill over time and the super powered double jump. But there's only one level that takes place during the day. There's also an armored vehicle you can blast enemies in, but there's only one level that uses it. There's even some type of overworld you can select your missions in, but it's introduced very late in the game, so you can only choose the order of 3 missions. They must have intended to make this longer, which would have been nice, because it was fun while it lasted. Sonic Mania is the only good Sonic game in the last 20 years, which is beyond sad because it was made by fans. It even says Sega proudly presents in the trailer, and this, as far as I know, is the only Sonic game that did that. God, Sega is so pathetic. Anyway, the game is fun. It's very fast and fluid and has some great variety in its presentation. Really, the only issues I have are its length and its ending. The final boss doesn't feel like one at all. And yes, I know that if you collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds, you unlock another world, but they're so well hidden here that it's not worth it. Running into every solid wall and looking for something that looks even remotely breakable ruins the fast pace of the game. Sonic 2 got the special stages right in that aspect anyway. Doom 2 is a solid sequel, but definitely a step down. It has the fluid controls, weapon variety, and memorable soundtrack, but it takes a hit in the level design. The first game pretty much did everything already, so all they could think of was to add hundreds of enemies in wide open areas, which is pretty interesting to find a way to overcome the ridiculous odds. By the 1000th time you die, it gets kind of annoying. The game is also a lot less clear on where you're supposed to go. I had to look up a long play a hell of a lot more than I had to with the first. And screw that final boss, it has both the problems I had with the game cranked to 1,000,000. God of War 3 is better than its predecessors. The combat has a lot more variation with alternate weapons you can unlock, and the puzzles this time around were a lot easier, and I almost never got stuck, so that's a plus. It had this weird issue where it would crash the console at complete random, and by the point I got to the final boss, it crashed every time the cutscene started. Apparently some copies of the game do this, and the only thing you can do is buy another one hoping it's one of the good ones. That or buy the PS4 remaster, but I'm not gonna do that, I'm too classy! Halo 5 Guardians is known by many as the worst game of the series, and I can see why they were so annoyed. I don't necessarily agree, but I understand. The game forces you to have 3 squad mates at all times. They barely shoot anything, so all they're really good for is healing you when you're dying, which definitely makes this game a lot easier than the other Halos. It tries to compensate by giving your character less health, but it's still an unnecessary addition that doesn't make the game any better. However, I do love the inclusion of the Spartan Charge. It's an exclusive melee attack for when you're sprinting, and you can lunge out in insane lengths if you position it right. It's probably a physics oversight, but it's still fun to do. It's still the Halo I know and love, and it may suck that it has no offline multiplayer, but I have every other game in the franchise for that, so who cares? Shantae Half Genie Hero is a 2D platformer, one that I'm ashamed to say is really good. It has a great soundtrack, great varieties and abilities, great level design that works with all abilities, and some of the best graphics on the console. I'm only ashamed to praise it because the game is so freaking cringe! And I try not to say that word due to how overused it is, but I can't think of any other word to describe it. Almost every character is just bait to get people to draw fan art, made abundantly obvious here due to it having a fan art gallery, and the dialogue is chock full of lazy as sin meta gags that the preteens adore so very, very much. But I don't care, just skip it, the game's fun. It does get pretty annoying after a while when you beat a level knowing full well you can't go to the next one without backtracking to every other level to find something only now you can access. Previous Shantae games had it so everything was linked to one big level, but for some reason they decided to change it, and as a result, backtracking is more tedious. Plants vs. Zombies is a tower defense game, and it being the national phenomenon it was, I've strangely never played it until last year, which is a shame, because I would have loved this to death as a kid. But nowadays, I only love it. Out of all the games on this list, this is definitely the one I was the most obsessed with. For a good week, I played nothing but it. Its concept is so simplistic, but it's executed so well that I never gave up and kept experimenting until I finished it. Then after that, there's a plethora of other game modes just in case you want more. I certainly did. They thought of every single twist you could possibly do with the concept and milked it for all it was worth. In a good way. Excitebots Trick Racing is a branch off from Excite Truck, which was a branch off from Excite Bike, which itself has changed quite a bit between installments. I think a few things were lost in translation, but I don't care because Excitebots is one of the greatest racing games on the Wii, if not the greatest. The graphics are top notch, the frame rate is perfect for its intense speed, and all it's really missing is a good soundtrack. The game uses motion controls, but for the first time in all my years playing Wii games, I think it not only controls great, but I would much rather play it this way than traditionally. Instead of simply needing to make it to first place, you require a certain amount of stars by the end of the race. Winning just gives you a big bonus. But playing the game this way is a lot more fun because there's jumps, power-ups, items, and cute little gimmicks sprinkled across each track that must be done correctly to get the maximum score. Not to mention there's alternate paths everywhere. I'm definitely going to play the hard mode I unlocked. Shantae and the Seven Sirens is my favorite game in the series, albeit I haven't played all of them. Sadly, the dialogue and character design is just as weeby as ever, and now it even has choppy cinematics animated by a Japanese studio, so there's officially no way to defend it anymore, so yes, I like a weeb game. But it's not perfect. Many of the abilities you collect make the game a lot easier as opposed to balancing the difficulty out, such as the healing ability, which might drain your magic, but you can get another ability that makes your magic auto-recharge. See, I'm critiquing it. That means I'm cool. I got stuck a lot, so I grinded a lot more gems than a typical non-idiot player, but I'm pretty sure it would still be poorly balanced even if I didn't, because Half Genie Hero had the same problem. But you know what Half Genie Hero didn't have? The giant Metroidvania-esque world from the earlier games. It's back! Also, your special transformation's been mapped to buttons, and it is way smoother this way. Not sure why the graphics took a hit, though. Halo Infinite went from being a letdown to being my favorite game in the series. It starts you off in a couple of linear levels, and although the grappling hook's a neat little addition, it was far too slow and clunky to be my preferred way of moving around. But then after the second level, it introduces you to the game's open world, and yes, this game very much caves into the video game peer pressure with its world upgrades, and most importantly, collectible audio logs. It's not a real game anymore unless you have that. But all the Halo and non-Halo elements blend together beautifully, and it still manages to keep that original Halo simplicity that made millions of people fall in love with the series to begin with. The grappling hook is oh so much fun to move around with when you upgrade it. Of course, it's not perfect. The world map can get really crowded due to it still showing all the side missions you've already completed, but you'll manage, I believe in you. I bought an Xbox One specifically for this game, and I only regret it because those buttholes hit the 4-player split screen behind newer consoles. That would have been nice to know beforehand. It's crazy how little FPSs can top the original Doom, even today. Everything from its near flawlessly balanced weapons arsenal, iconic visuals, memorable soundtrack, and silky smooth gameplay curve easily make it the best game I've beaten this year. I wrote the review before I beat Halo Infinite, it's actually pretty close. I did get stuck a few times, but minus Mount Erebus, it was all on me being dumb. Don't let its release date fool you, this game is timeless.